Hello, I'd like to call this meeting to order. It's Tuesday, November 1st, 2022. This is a special Public Works Committee meeting, City of Hudson. My name is Joy Knudsen, and I'm the chair of this committee. I represent District 3. I'd like to call the roll. Mike Kennedy.
Here.
Sarah Brook.
Here.
Okay, our council members are present. We also have in attendance Public Works Director Michael Mraz and Dean Chamberlain, who is the city engineer, and happy to have Deb Andrews with us, Executive Assistant in Public Works Department. We first order of business is to approve minutes from our last meeting,
I so move.
October 5th.
Second.
Okay, I just have one comment which I already communicated to Deb, as the teacher who spoke to us is from an organization called CISA, which was hard to hear her speak that night. It stands for Cooperative Education or something. That's a statewide agency. So if we can just correct that, and she gave us a presentation about visually impaired students, or spoke to us about their needs. Anyway, okay, so we have a motion and second. All in favor? Okay, by saying aye. Okay, opposed? Okay, minutes are approved. Comments and suggestions from citizens present? Seeing none, we'll move on to new business. Tonight, our primary business, our new business, is to discuss the capital improvement plan that's been prepared for us. We'll be looking at a 5-year plan, 2023 to 2027, and we do have a guest here tonight. Sean Lentz is here from Ellers, which we're very grateful for your time. Would you like Sean to start, or do you want to make some remarks, Mike?
I guess I'll make some initial remarks to the committee, and then we'll bring Sean up, and he can kind of walk through the numbers and obviously be available to answer any questions that you might have. So the capital improvement plan is a culmination of needs that have been identified both at staff level and committee levels for the various departments, including IT, police, fire, public works, parks, so on and so forth, and all kind of compiled into one document. And for the Public Works Committee, that includes, street infrastructure that we've been talking about over the last year and a half, the Public Works facility that we've been discussing. And so those are kind of the bigger items that we'll be looking at tonight and discussing. But basically, it's a plan for the city to start making a plan to move forward into the future and start, purchasing these assets, so on and so forth, and making these improvements. So the biggest thing that I'd speak to right off the get-go is, as Joy commented, the plan is from 2023 to 2027. As we're discussing this, keep in mind that any recommendations to Finance Committee, the bonding is in a 2-year cycle. Okay, so for example, it's in 2023, 2024, then 25, 26, and 27, 28. Yeah. And so if you make a recommendation tonight to improve the plan as presented, you're only really forwarding those first 2 years. It's not like we're going to borrow for the whole 5 years. It's the first 2 years that it's actually going to be bonded for. And Sean can kind of explain that as well. So in the plan itself, obviously, kind of just go over it at a high level. The 2023 projects, the big one that stands out is the Public Works facility. And that is at $9 million for a new facility that we've been discussing. And then also I want to point out the street and infrastructure. So I know in the past we've talked about different funding levels, so on and so forth, but with the needs of a Public Works facility and then the possibility of a new police facility into the future, it was kind of staff's recommendation kind of curtail that large street and infrastructure number right off the get-go, because we were talking $5, $6, $7 million at one point in time. But in order to kind of keep this realistic for the taxpayers, we kind of curtailed that down. So for the first 2 years, it's $2 million. And then the next 2 years, it bumps up to 2.5. And the following years, it's up to 3. And Dean can kind of go into the impacts of that at a later time. But that's kind of the general gist of the CIP that's in front of you, and some various pieces of equipment, so on and so forth, for Public Works, police, fire. So with that being said, I guess I'll turn it over to Sean, and maybe he can walk through some of the numbers that are in your packets and answer any questions that you might have.
Great, thanks, Mike. I believe all of the
committee members have the 4 sheets that Mike alluded to in the packet. And so I will take you through those. And I would start out by saying that I think what the city is doing by reviewing the capital improvement plan, not just from the standpoint of a list of projects that are important to the city to move forward with, but also from the standpoint of what's the impact. So when you do from my perspective, when you do a capital project, let's use the Public Works building, there's the impact of the project itself. Let's say it's $9 million. So that's the cost to build it. But just like when you buy a home, there's also the cost to pay for it, really. And that's, generally speaking, is through the issuance of debt and then paid back over time. So I do see some communities fall in the rut of understanding the first part, how much certain projects are going to cost, but they don't spend much time looking at what is really going to be the impact of this when it's in the context of everything else that the city is doing. So I certainly commend you guys for trying to get ahead of the game and really looking at both the cost of projects, the timing of doing them, as well as what the impact will be to the taxpayers of the city. So with that in mind, if the first exhibit is the one that's the existing indebtedness of the city currently. I want to make sure I'm on the same position as you guys.
Page 11.
Yep. So we have worked with the city on an approach to the financing of capital projects. Mike alluded to it, Dean alluded to it. It's a combination of street projects, some equipment and vehicles getting in there. And those are kind of what I would describe as the perpetual projects of the city, to maintain your assets and to keep up with the equipment needs, to do what the city is responsible for. And that has been able to be managed. If you look at the column total debt levy, the plan was to have the debt levy be about 2.3 million, and it was in 2022 for the budget you did last year for the current year we're in. And it's about that same amount next year in 2023 with no new additional debt being added. And then the levy falls after that. And that was by design. We've talked about with staff about this because, as Mike alluded to, in 2023 was going to be the next borrowing for 2 more years worth of projects. And that was the ongoing perpetual project finance plan was staying right in that range of that 2.3 million. But what I often see and what the city is wrestling right now is what I like to call legacy projects. They're the big projects that communities have to do, but they usually end up doing maybe once every 30 to 60 years, depending on how long a facility lasts or if they need to do major expansions. And the most recent one here that I can think of is the fire station. You had to do a major expansion of the fire stations recently. So when we look at the numbers, what we're going to be looking at here is, as Mike pointed out, the new debt for just the regular plan that the city had, but then also adding on these legacy one time every 50-year type projects as well. Okay. So before I move on to the next exhibit, any questions about this? I had one other thing I was going to mention to you. If you look on the far right, and I know the numbers get a little small here, there's a equalized mill rate, and it's just over 1.01. Mm-hmm. The city's total mill rate is a little over 4. Like I think it's like 4.27 or something like that, or 1.7. And just for comparison purposes, that means your debt of your budget's probably a little less than a quarter of the total in terms of what you have to levy to pay back. And that's not a bad spot to be in. What I see in Wisconsin, one of the, I think, unintended consequences of levy limits is more and more projects have gotten pushed to borrowing because that's really the only way you can get them done. It's hard to fit them in your budget unless you go through like a referendum process. So the city being able to maintain it at around a quarter of your total levy is a pretty good spot, because I do see other communities big and small, creeping up into that 30 to 40% of their levy is for debt, because again, that's the only way they, within the levy limit rules, they can finance their projects. Okay? All right, if we move to the second page, and again, just to make sure I'm with you, it's the rainbow. It's got new debt issues listed here. So from left to right, we show a couple issues in 23, another one in 24, a couple issues in 25, a couple in 27, and then 28. Now, Mike had started out, he had talked a little bit about doing borrowings every other year. The one other factor that comes into play is there's a limit from the federal government. It's called the bank qualification limit. And what that is in a calendar year, if the city issues 10 million or less, your debt falls into one type of category. If you issue more than 10 million, from the federal standpoint, it falls into a different category. What does that mean to the city? The under 10 category has tax advantages to it to hopefully get even lower interest rates and take maximum advantage of the tax exemption. If you go over 10, it's going to be a little more costly. So in the current market, and we, Ellers, will keep looking at this to make sure at the time that you actually move forward with debt, we'll make a recommendation as what we think is the best way to do it. Maybe it will be doing it all at once rather than spacing it out. But the plan as it sits right now, we're trying to stay under that 10 million every year. So for the public works building, as an example, instead of financing 100% of it in 2023, some of it is being financed in 24 so that we can stay below the 10 million. But again, we'll look at the market and make a decision at the time. The council will ultimately make the decision what's the best way to do that.
Could I interrupt you? Sorry to ask a question. What do you think might happen with interest rates? I mean, that's a trade-off there. Obviously, we want to keep that bank qualification, but do you see the rates jumping quite a bit in a year?
Yes. It's really kind of tricky right now because on the one hand, you certainly have the Fed seemingly very committed to raising rates to control inflation.
Right.
No question about that. On the other hand is if there's a recessionary types of pressures that come in, that could offset where the Fed is a little bit, maybe have them slow it down. Mm-hmm. I would say that like going into 2023 as an example, to answer your question as specifically as possible, we know what we're going to be doing in 23 pretty much for projects. I would think trying to do that borrowing earlier in the year than later in the year probably makes sense. But when we get to 24, I'm less sure about where rates are going to be there. We could crest in 23 and actually start going down in 24. And we'll be keeping an eye on that.
That the rates might come back down.
Yes, correct. I'm sorry, I should be a little more clear about that.
Thank you.
Where there's a continued raising of rates to deal with inflationary pressures, some point that peaks out, and then maybe as we get into very late 2023 to 24, maybe rates start coming down at that point.
Sure. And so that's an unknown, whereas we do know that if we go over 10 million, it is not advantageous.
It costs more.
Right. So it is wise to stay with that, which is a known benefit, is to stay under the 10 million.
Yes.
Even though the rate could be higher in
Right.
2024, but yet so that makes sense. Thank you.
Yeah, and maybe just one last thing on that bank qualified, non-bank qualified. So normally there's a split. If you're bank qualified, let's say your interest rate is 4%, same credit. So it's City of Hudson in both these examples. If you're non-bank qualified, maybe your rate's 425 or 430. So that's the spread. And it usually moves this way. There are market situations where that gets tighter, and that's where I say we'll watch it. And if we're seeing that it's really tight, then maybe we might say, no, the way things look, it makes sense to proceed with everything. But we'll keep the council informed of that.
Thank you.
Yep, you bet.
Thanks for explaining that.
You go and then I have one too.
Okay.
You go next.
Thank you. Is it one rate, you say 10 million, the cap, is it two chunks of money then? Is it 10 million plus an additional 3 that are treated differently, or it's all or nothing?
It's all or nothing.
Okay, if you're over 10, it's
If you're over 10, all your debt is non-bank qualified. If you're under, it's all
Okay,
bank
thank you.
qualified. Yep.
And my question was about financing it over 2 years. Explain to me how that works. I'm thinking about it, how if somebody were to build a home, you really, you don't finish the house in 1 year. I'm wondering how that works.
Yep.
From our perspective.
No, it's, sometimes I forget that most people would view it that way. Like a home, a bank wouldn't let you just borrow for half the home, right?
Right.
The difference is when you and I, all of us go and buy a house, it's our credit. When we go out to borrow money for, say, like the Public Works building project, it's the full faith and credit of the city that's
Okay.
behind it. It's not the asset itself. It isn't, you're not pledging the Public Works building to the people who buy the bonds. What you're pledging to them is that you'll levy a tax to pay the bonds back.
I gotcha.
So they don't really equate the two together.
Thank you.
And the contractors are comfortable that you will,
You're paid for it.
you'll come up with the money and pay
Okay.
for it, right? Right.
Thank you. Thanks for explaining that.
You bet. So any other questions on this exhibit? The next page, I think, shows things better, which is the chart, than looking at all the numbers here. So
So
on
that's the mountain chart, right?
the mountain
Sean?
chart,
Okay.
yep, that's exactly right, up the Himalayas here. So the blue bars at the bottom, that's representative of the city's existing indebtedness. So those are commitments you've already made, and you can see over time that gradually goes down. The purple then is the debt in '23, and some of that debt's paid over 10 years, some's over 20. The lighter blue is the '24, which is the second half of the Public Works building. That's really what that entails primarily. The orange is debt issued in '25. And then 27's debt and 28 debt. When we get to those, Mike had also mentioned a police facility, an upgrade or a new police facility at that time. So, that's a little further out on the horizon, but for this plan, we put it in just to kind of be showing the big picture as to where things go. So what you see here in terms of two ways of looking at the debt payments is with all of this projects included, we go from the 2.3 million in levy to pay our principal and interest on our debt payments up to just below 5 million in 2029 is again with the timing that we're talking about here. So that's the peak of the red bar. The other way we look at debt is the mill rate. And so the mill rate is the debt levy itself divided by the tax base of the city. And you can see that going from, right now, as I'd mentioned, you're at about 1 mil for debt, payment of debt. And it goes up to just under, I think, about 1.8 mils. Yeah, 1.81 mils, just over 1.8 over time as you're adding all the projects through that period of time. So if, as an example, the city grows faster than the projections that we have, that mill rate could be lower. If it grows slower, the mill rate could end up being higher. Okay? And another question I commonly get is, what's the term of this debt? How much are you paying this back? We've got some of the debt, because it's more equipment related and it has a shorter useful life, that's going to be paid back in a 5-10 year period. The streets, the facilities, much longer useful life. But there is a limit under Wisconsin law as to how long we can go with the issuance of general obligation debt, and that's 20 years. So the maximum term you'll see on this debt is a 20-year term to pay it back. So any questions on that? The other last thing I'll mention too is that the payment schedules right now are set up with roughly a level payment every year. So kind of like your mortgage, where you pay the same every month or the same every year. We don't have to do it that way. One way we could do it is pay less principal here to keep the payments lower, but then we'd have to pay more principal later, And that commonly means that you end up with more of a plateau rather than a mountain where you go up and then go down. So the negative part of the plateau approach is it pushes out principal payment longer. You're going to pay more interest over time to do that. The benefit of it is maybe you can try to avoid some of the spike up that you see when you're taking on a lot of big projects like the city is looking at now. So there's that trade-off. The other negative is this is only showing projects from 23 through 27, 28 period. Invariably, the city's going to also have additional projects in the future. And if we do more of a plateau approach, you're going to have to stack that on at some point down the road. So we can look at other ways of financing it. We wanted to start with this option for discussion. But if that was something that the city wanted to look into, we could look at it in those options.
Do you find communities going one way or the other with that plateau effect or mountains? Is it kind of based on the community and what kind of what support is at each council?
Yeah, it is. It's some of it would be where you sit currently in terms of your tax levy, what the public's load is right now, what sort of pressure you're under in terms of managing that as best you can. And then there's also, what does the future have? I would certainly discourage the plateau if you knew you had a number of other legacy projects coming down the road, because you're just asking for, you're going to really reduce your flexibility in the future.
Yeah, and that is one thing before you continue, Sean, is to point out with the CIP is obviously, Sean alluded to the fire station that was recently done. That's a large legacy project. The Public Works facility is obviously a legacy project, and then the PD building, right? If you really think about it, after that, the city is really set up to not have a legacy project for the next 30, 40 years, right? And so, City Hall is not going to be, we're not going to build a new City Hall, so on and so forth. So the projects that are in the CIP are basically the last two remaining legacy projects that the city has to kind of keep up with the growth that has been happening over the last 20 years. So just keep that in the back of your mind. The continued debt beyond 2028 is probably going to be more geared towards infrastructure upgrades. If the Public Works Committee and Finance Council choose to do that, it's not going to be towards facilities. So.
Yep.
And it is a rather compressed time period when you think really in a decade we will have done 3 big buildings. Probably should have been spread out. We know that there's been needs earlier, but we can't second guess what other councils have done, and we can't control what future councils will do. But at this point, we're going to move forward. We're hopefully moving forward with this plan. So, thank you.
Well, and maybe that'll be a good segue to the last slide then. So we also wanted to include one where we try to zero in more on the impact of these various phases of capital improvement projects on a particular property. And what we did for this example is we ran it on a property with a taxable value of $400,000, which I think on some, we had looked on Redfin, that was the approximate median value. So that's what we had used. So I'm going to try to use the color. Hopefully you guys have this in color to help link this together. So let's start on the left side of the page. The pay years is as shown. That's the year that the taxes are being paid and the debt is being paid. The next one, your equalized value. This is the equalized value of the city, not including your tax increment district. So this is what you levy over your general expenses of the city over this tax base. Currently, this year, you're at $2.3 billion. You had a nice bump up, so for taxes due next year, it's $2.7 billion. And the other thing I'll mention, this is equalized value. So I don't want to get too much in the weeds. Equalized value is usually the best way to do an analysis of things over time, because it's much more consistent. Assessed value, on the other hand, and trade-off is assessed value is what people pay their taxes on, so that's really what they see. Assessed value, though, it tends to be kind of, stagnant with some growth in it. Then there's a reassessment, and then it spikes up. So if you use assessed value over time, you can end up with some really big changes. Equalize a little bit more subtle. So I usually start with this, and if there's interest in seeing things on the assessed value, we certainly can get that for the group as well. So sorry to get us off a little bit. And then what we did preliminarily for projection purposes is we did a 5% growth rate on that equalized value each year. So 5% next year and beyond. You certainly were well above that this current year. You have been above that the last number of years, that 5%. But, the future is, we don't know. And you could even see a potential where some year maybe it even goes down. Yeah, so we started with that, but that's certainly another assumption that if you wanted to see something different, we could make changes to that assumption.
But this is a fairly conservative estimate of that 5%.
Based on what's been happening, yep.
At this point.
Yep.
What has been our average the last 3 years? Has it been 18 to 20 for equalized value or even more?
This last year was double digits for sure, and I think we've been certainly above 5. I think we're close to 10.
Okay.
Yeah, I have that, but I'm off the top of my head, I'm forgetting. what
Okay,
that
that's
is.
fine. Yep.
Okay, so from there then moving left to right, the blue numbers are the existing debt that we had talked about. This is commitments the city has already made. And then the next column, increase from new CIP debt, that's right off that last slide. So it's just adding that new debt over for the list of capital projects that Mike started us out this evening. And then the projected debt levy, that is the sum of the two. Existing debt commitments that the city's already made, and then followed by the CIP new debt. So that's our projected total. And then what we did with the mill rate is we divide that projected total debt levy, the column right under Exhibit 3, by the tax base, that equalized value, and that translates into a mill rate. So just to kind of talk about this for a second, the mill rate for 2022 was 1.01. Our debt levy for next year is not changing. It's staying the same. So why does the mill rate go down? It's because you grew significantly on equalized value. Then when we add the debt, the 2023 debt, the purple numbers, when we add that levy for levy 23 for pay and collect 24, that's where we're showing that mill rate going back up close to the 1, but not quite there yet. When we add the 24 debt, which is the second public works building debt, then we're up to 1.1. And then when we start getting into 25's debt, which again is the regular scheduled debt, then we go to 125. 26, there isn't any debt projected to be issued under this CIP currently, so that's why it goes down a little bit from the 125 to the 119. And then when we get at the end and we're adding in the police station debt over 2 years, that's going to $1.24 and $1.35 from there. Now for that $400,000 house, for this current year, the debt levy was about a $400 cost to that homeowner for $400,000. Next year, again, if their house stays at $400, but the value of the city has grown, that drops to $341. And then
That's the portion of their property tax that's going towards debt.
debt only.
Debt only.
Yep,
Okay.
thank you, Mike, for
Okay.
emphasizing that. Yep. And then 24 and 25, again, that's the years that we're hitting the public works building. So it goes 380 and then 440. So one way to look at this is you're going from 405, where we are for this current year in 22, up to about 440 when the full impact of the public works building hits, as well as some other debt on there. And then beyond that, again, when we add the police building on a $400,000 property out into 29, that's when that hits fully. That's at about $540 for debt on a $400,000 property. Go ahead, sorry.
I does this include the infrastructure needs for the roads then too, this figure?
It includes what Mike had talked
Okay.
about, which is the
The
2 million and I think it was 2.5, Mike,
Five.
right?
Yep, and then the
And
3.
ultimately 3. Okay.
Yep.
So that,
Right.
perfect.
So the difference between what a citizen is paying right now on property taxes that goes towards debt, the difference between what they pay in 2022 to when it peaks at 2029, it's a difference of $133.92 more on the property tax payer
Yep.
to go towards that debt. That's kind of the bottom line.
Right, and if we get less growth
Yep.
in the tax base of the city, that would be higher. If we
Yep.
get more growth than what we're projecting here, it would be lower.
Okay.
Yep.
And
But that also depends on their house staying at that value, is that correct? So if.
This is keeping it at 400 for that
So
whole
that's
term.
the hard part to predict.
is.
Of course, we're all happy when our home value goes up,
Yep.
but if that means we pay more taxes, it's still money out of your pocket.
Yep.
Yep.
At that point, I mean, we want to be sensitive to that, because I'm assuming the equalized value is coming somewhat from commercial valuation and also private residential.
It is.
Is it
and
that boost?
Where I really think, to your point, Joy, where it hits folks differently is the change in equalized value is both from new actual construction and inflation
Yeah.
value, as you're pointing out. So it isn't like we can just fixate on the one. It's both together is what grows that tax base. For folks, the inflationary increase could mean an increase for them because it could be their home or it could be their business.
Sure.
That inflationary basis went up. Everybody benefits from a tax base growth from new construction because that's a spreading of the tax base overall. So in an ideal world, your growth and value, this 5% would be all new construction, but it's usually a mix of new construction and inflationary increases. Yep.
Okay.
Well, and for inflation, usually everybody's inflating at the same time, right? So a $400,000 house for one person, inflating 5%, the other person should probably see it inflating 5% too, so.
Be reasonably
Yeah,
consistent.
Your addition of money and inflation is gonna kind of raise all the boats at the same time, right?
Right, it probably isn't, it's not done on a parcel by
Yeah.
parcel basis, it's more just across the board for the whole city, correct?
You mean everyone will feel the pain, is that what you're saying?
Well, I mean, the mill rate for everybody goes down if inflation for everybody goes up, right?
Yeah, you can have a situation where your mill rate is going down, but the taxes go up. When that happens, it's because the value of the property is growing faster than the expenses are growing, and that's where you can see the mill rate going down, but you're still end up paying more because the value of your home went up more than that decrease.
Interesting.
And so if we saw the equalized value kind of continue as it has, higher than that 5%
Yep.
that you've projected here, we could be in a position in 2 years when we're doing our next vote to decide, okay, do we want to invest heavier in our infrastructure and our roads that are in a precarious state? Or we could potentially not, and then would our residents see some kind of reduction in their projected tax impact?
Yeah, if we started from this plan and then we would monitor it and came back to the council and said, well, just so we update everybody, the growth factor has been smaller than what we had projected. You could make alterations to what projects you were going to proceed with in an effort to minimize what would be a higher increase than what we're showing now
Okay.
here. Yep. And I should probably mention, Mike alluded to this at the beginning, so the way the borrowings get authorized, I was here a few weeks back for the one that we're doing for tax increment district number 5. It's the same process. So, even if you were to say, we as a committee and we as a council approve going forward with the CIP as it sits now, the borrowing authorization would not be approved by you doing that. That has to come back to you as a separate resolution.
Gotcha.
and the council would have to approve those separate borrowings at that time. So you're not really committing to this in terms of borrowing for it until you actually approve those resolutions
Gotcha.
and go forward with those.
Thank you for the extra details, appreciate that.
Thank you for being so knowledgeable on something that is so complicated.
Yeah, if the committee, I appreciate that, first off. If you guys are interested in seeing things with some different assumptions, please let Mike know, let Dean know, we can certainly get that for you. But as we started, we didn't want to come with too much tonight, because this is a lot of material to go through to begin with.
Yeah.
So,
Absolutely.
yep. Oh, thank you.
A lot to absorb. Thank you so much, I really appreciate it, Sean.
Yeah. So I guess the next thing that I'd like to just tackle is based on that information. Obviously, like I said, in the previous year, the Public Works Committee has looked at various street funding levels. And now that we've kind of zeroed in on, presenting $2 million for the first 2 years, and then bumping up to 2.5 for the next 2, and then 3, I just want to kind of turn it over to Dean and kind of explain kind of what the implications are for that funding level, and just kind of let you know what you would see based on, that kind of funding structure. So, Dean, you want to?
Yeah, so I had sent out to you guys a map and a list of projects essentially, and this is not what we're voting on tonight, by the way, just to be clear, we're not voting on this project list. That would be something we're going to talk more about in December, is actually voting on CIP projects to match the funding levels that are ultimately approved. But I just wanted to give this to you let you get the sense of what types of projects like this funding level equates to, just to help you kind of understand, like, is this kind of where you feel we need to be, with our infrastructure funding for the next few years, that kind of thing. So in 2023, 2024, again, the current budget has $2 million per year. And so what we would look to do with those funding amounts in those years would be to really tackle seal coating essentially every street in town that is in good condition, to keep it that way. So that will lower our long-term costs, so that we're not, paying to rebuild a street because we didn't spend enough money to keep it in good condition in the first place, that kind of thing. So on the map, you'll see in kind of the dashed line is what would be a seal coats for the next couple of years. On the map, the yellow refers to projects in 2023, and the light green is in 2024. And again, for those who are tuning into this meeting, tune back in December to kind of get more of those details for you guys too. But just know that that's what we would be targeting. It would be kind of the more routine, we'll say, maintenance projects in 2023, 2024. So again, that'd be a lot of seal coats like we've been doing for our major streets the past couple of years. And then moving into some more resurfacing projects. We would also be looking in 2023 to do the 3rd Street Laurel Avenue project that we didn't do this year because the bid prices were too high. And then extending that pavement replacement all the way down to Walnut, as we had originally planned to do, just to make that a complete project again. So that being said, once we bump up to higher funding levels in future years, that allows us to do more. You'll see that essentially the lower funding amounts for earlier years mean that we don't do a lot of street reconstructions. We do a lot more maintenance projects, and conversely, if you have more funding, then we would look to do some of those street reconstruction projects that we also need to do. So you won't see in the map, so to speak, projects that a lot of us have talked about in the past, like say 9th Street being reconstructed, Fillmore Oak behind the high school,
Green
Street, River Ridge Road. Some of those projects, because a reconstruction project is obviously much more expensive than doing a maintenance project on it. And so we're only able to do the bigger cost reconstruction projects when we have a bigger budget, if that makes sense. You will see, kind of as we get to 2027, so towards the end, when you have $3 million a year, then we're able to do a project like reconstruct Locust Street downtown, that kind of thing. So just keep that in mind. So that being said, if this committee feels that these funding levels aren't adequate, and we need to be, spending more money up front or, in sooner years, so to speak, that is something we can consider and plug in essentially to the model. Sean can work his magic again and get the numbers for you. But we asked Ellers to kind of give us, like, if we did more infrastructure projects sooner, like roughly what impact does that have on your average house? Like that last column in the last sheet that Sean was talking about, that starts with $405.88 in 2022. How does that add to that number? Essentially, for every $500,000, excuse me, that's borrowed in 1 year, so $500,000, the impact to a median value house is $5.50 each year for the next 20 years, essentially, more or less. So
$5.23 a year?
$5.50 a year for the next for the length of the bond cycle, so that's usually 20 years. Yep. And so that being said, if say you bumped the funding levels up from $2 million to $2.5 million in both 23 and 24, you have to do that twice because you're essentially adding $1 million to the bonding instead of $500,000. So just to keep that in mind. So yeah, there's always this trade-off. We know we have a lot of needs, and I hope you guys agree with me that we do have a lot of needs. We gotta have that balancing act. Like, okay, we have a lot of needs, but we also need to make sure that we're being cognizant of people aren't swimming in money either. So how much are they going to be paying in property tax, and what is the right balance of that kind of stuff? And that's what you guys are here to do. So we're happy to provide any more feedback for you for that.
If we did add $500,000 more each year, give us a sense on what this map might look like.
Yeah. So say in 2023, 2024, bumping up from $2 to $2.5 million. So kind of the projects that I have listed for say 2025 or so, that kind of shifted up, say a year or something like that. And then we would add more kind of reconstruction projects toward the end of the 5-year cycle. So because we would, pushing more to the front frees up space in the back. And so then we would potentially have money to do things like reconstruct 9th Street or, something like that. And that all depends on exactly how much money it is and that kind of thing. So, if you're interested in particular, funding levels and whatever, I can certainly, you can reach out to me. I can certainly give you kind of this project is about this much money, that kind of thing. How would that plug in? I can give you more info offline on that as well. So, but that's how it would pretty much affect. So like, for instance, on the map here, the blue line showing Carmichael Road being repaved in 26, we would really like to shift that forward to say 2024 or something like that, because that's a major project for a street that sees a lot of traffic. It would benefit a lot of people. So that would be one project in particular that would move up sooner, if that makes sense.
Are you looking at full depth reclamation? I have a hard time knowing
Yeah,
the
sorry, no,
dots or
that
the
is a
slashes.
mill underseal and overlay.
It is,
So it's
okay.
called underseal on the map there.
But needing to do that sooner than later so that we don't have to do the full depth.
Right,
That's-
exactly.
That's the
Yep.
tricky part.
Yeah.
Balancing that.
Yep, sooner you hit it, the less money it costs generally, so.
That's challenging.
So, last time we spoke about, I'll say last year, or I guess 2 years ago, what was the number that, we're looking at 2 million right now. Was it 1.37 or something? What were we at? For
Our
20?
historical average okay, so for this year in 2022, we did $1.2 million.
1.2, okay.
Extrapolating that into the past, it's about 1.3 million per year. That being said, 2021 was a little special because we had the Highway 35 project. We ended up spending more
Yep.
in 2021 than normal, but it was mostly for one large project. Yep. But 1.3 is about what we've been doing, and this would, even the plan that's in the CIP right now would be an increase based from what we have been historically doing. And the flip side of this is if this committee and the council feel that we can't be spending this much money, you can go less, than what we're showing as well. Staff would probably recommend not going less because we have a lot of needs we need to take care of at some point,
Right.
but that is an option as well.
Well, and we saw what 1.2, 1.3 does. It's a lot of kicking the can down the road, and a lot of patching as opposed to improving, so, yeah.
And the cost has been high this year, too.
Yeah.
Asphalt prices were high, that curtailed some of our plans to do trail maintenance, which is unfortunate. So we have to keep that in mind as we make our decisions next year. Hopefully, those prices will moderate a bit so that we don't get hit with that again, because
Yeah.
you do a great job of estimating, but engineers' estimate was they were blowing right past it this year.
Yeah.
It's expensive.
It's been a very unique year this year in particular with high oil prices causing a lot of things to be up, and hopefully that won't last forever. Will it come down in 2023? We hope so, but we don't know. I don't think it'll be forever that will be up in $120 a ton for asphalt, that kind of thing. It does fluctuate over time generally.
Sure.
So. I also wanted to point out too that if you look in the CIP attachment that looks like this, you'll see that we have line items for sidewalk, curb and gutter, trail maintenance, and alley reconstructs separate from this amount that I was talking about. So just wanted to let you know that those are still included in the CIP. They're just not in what I'm showing right now. So
Okay.
we still have, that's kind of like an annual amount we put towards that is still in there. So.
Thank you so much for going to the work of getting these projected tax impacts. That's really helpful as we make this decision. So I appreciate that, and I know that was a considerable amount of work, so. But it really makes me feel like you're making a really informed choice, so thank you.
As we were putting this plan together as staff and working with Sean, obviously we want to keep the taxpayer in mind. We want to be realistic with what we're going to be proposing and recommending. We don't want to put numbers out there that aren't realistic. And obviously having the two legacy projects, the three legacy projects really close together, like Joy alluded to, is kind of hampering, tying our hands behind our back as far as what we can do with infrastructure at this point. Obviously, we'd probably like to see it as staff be increased more just because we know the needs are out there, but the facility needs are high as well. The Public Works is working out of buildings from the 60s and 70s, and it's just, they've been talking about this since the late 90s, and it's just, they said, it's kind of been pushed down the road, and we're at a point now where it's like, we can't really wait any longer. And so that's kind of, playing into some of the numbers that are being presented to you tonight and why they are kind of reduced from what we were originally talking about with street and infrastructure. So, but yeah, I just want to kind of reiterate that as we're putting these plans together and as we continue to talk about them, the bottom line is, this falls on the taxpayer of the city of Hudson, and we want to be really cognizant of that impact to them, especially at this time, with what's going on out in the world and the economy.
Yeah, and I also wanted to say too that, so what our action item is tonight is essentially a recommendation from this committee to forward to our finance committee, who's going to be talking about the budget CIP stuff, I believe on Monday, right?
So finance is talking
Yep.
about
Right.
CIP if it's approved tonight, and council is reviewing the full budget.
Yep. So this committee would make a recommendation for, in particular, the things on the CIP that fall under the purview of Mike and I. So that would be the street maintenance stuff that I was talking about, the public works facility that Mike's talking about, and any other equipment and whatnot that's shown on the
Thank
CIP
you.
as well.
Thanks for pointing that out, Dean, because as you can see, you've been presented with the capital projects for the other departments too.
Yeah.
So we can vote for them as a group or, individually, the buildings, the public works equipment, and street and infrastructure, or we could group them together. But they have, on our pages, of course, we have the police needs, information technology, et cetera, is included.
So this, I'd suggest either making a motion to recommend adoption of what's shown on the CIP as shown, or make a motion to do as shown with specific changes, whether it's a funding amount for street infrastructure or a specific project that you would like to not see on the CIP list, that kind of thing. But just to kind of direct, your conversation there.
That's a great point, thank you. Well, let's talk a little bit about the Public Works facility then. Mike, you and I have talked separately, but I wanted you to address that again. I know that Cedar Corp initially, when they did their study 2 years ago, thought that we would be looking at $12 million to get an adequate building for a city our size. We are very much undersized just by square footage, let alone the efficiencies and the work areas, workspaces, et cetera. So when you brought a plan to us in August that had 8 million, but now it's at 9 million, is that just taking inflation into account?
It's
or?
taking inflation into account and some of the permitting, architectural work that needs to happen prior to even building the new building, as well as the land itself.
Yeah, okay.
Yep.
So do you feel comfortable, I mean, did Cedar Corp recommend some things that were like Cadillac version at 12 million?
Yes, some of the numbers that they budgeted. For instance, they had money in the detail for a salt storage facility was like $800,000, and I reached out to a couple of companies that do salt sheds professionally, and it's more around 200 to 250. We can get an adequate salt shed that would accommodate the salt load that we're looking for. So there's things like that where we can not get the Cadillac version, as you so eloquently stated, and reduce some of the sizes, and maybe incorporate, instead of having a separate training room and a separate lunchroom, incorporating those into one, multi-use room for the staff, so on and so forth. So there's ways that you can reduce some of the square footage to bring that number down, and that's why it went from 12 million down to 9 million, which I feel is more realistic in getting passed, both at Public Works and Finance and Council. So I didn't want to put out $15 million and not have a chance at getting it passed.
Right.
Mike, could you also expand upon the east and the west garage, what the plans are for that and how that would impact this then?
Yep.
So people know?
Yep, so right now, the Public Works Committee operates out of 3 separate facilities. The East Shop, which is at 1520 Second Street. The West Shop, it is 1450 Second Street, or 1450.
23.
14, no.
Something like that.
What is it, Kevin?
It's 1423 and 1520.
Thank you, Deb. Thank you, Deborah. 1423 Second Street, and then 2001 Ward Avenue. And so the thought is the current sites on the north side of town, the east and west garage, those would be sold for redevelopment, and the money that we receive based on the sale of those properties, we could use to offset some of the costs for a new Public Works facility. And we did have those appraised. And so the East Shop, as it is right now, should I share this information, Sean? Probably not. So, I mean,
Okay.
but we can probably offset the sale of those properties towards a new Public Works facility.
Perfect. And so that would happen after you had moved in there, and then we would be able to apply whatever profits we got from that towards this.
Correct.
Okay. And would that lower the tax impact then?
That's a great question, Sean.
Well, I think where the discussion is going here is that if you started at the 9 million that we had in the plan and used sale proceeds to bring that down, the answer would be yes.
Okay.
It would, all of the things. If, as you got into more of the final design for the project, you determined that
It's going to be more?
it might be a little bit more, it may offset to have you
Okay.
stay at the impact, but be able to do a little more project. It kind of depends on where you go with that.
Thank you for the clarification.
Sure, and
Thank you,
inflation could play a role. But on that note, though, that's an interesting point, Sarah. Is there a prepayment penalty, to pay a bond down more quickly?
There isn't a penalty, but there's a blackout period typically.
Okay.
So if we do just to give you an example, if we issue a 20-year bond, the first 8 years, we can't prepay.
Okay.
But starting in the 8th year through the 20th year, the city could do whatever you want.
Okay.
It's your option
Okay.
at that point.
Thank you. Good discussion. Well, I do feel that the building, I think most of you know that my preference is that we move forward with that. I do feel it has been needed for a while and perhaps delayed longer than we should have. We do have quite a few valued employees that work there and need safe and appropriate workspace. And they do help maintain our infrastructure. I mean, those are the folks who fix the stormwater catch basin that breaks down unexpectedly, and, you know, so they are part of our infrastructure. It's true they're not necessarily building new streets, it's true patching, et cetera, striping, things like that, but it's just one of those expenses we're gonna have to do at some point. And I favor that we move forward with that, and Dean and I have talked several times. I definitely hear him and I believe you, and the things that you're saying about our needs and the costs to improve, and you know, some of the structural needs that we're going to have to face are real. And so I really hope that as the council, we can move forward obtaining more funding. So.
And I just wanted to make sure I understood correctly with the figures you were giving us, Dean. So if we went for the year 23-24, we bumped that to 2.5 million. If somebody puts forward a motion saying something like that, the additional impact to our taxpayers would be $10 a year.
Yeah, $11 a year, right? Yep. Yep.
Oh, yeah, I'm sorry, $11 per year.
Starting in 2024.
For 25 years.
Taxes paid in 2024.
Yep.
$11 to give us an extra $500,000 a year,
For just those 2 years.
just those
Yep.
2 years. Okay.
And the $11 was for the $400,000.
I'm sorry, yes, and sorry, thank you for that clarification. Okay.
And that would not put us over the $10 million cap that we're trying to stay under.
Correct, it would not.
We'd have some room there.
We do.
Okay. But that is going to affect our budget, because then we do have a higher payment. So there's other numbers, you know, that it's going to reflect, but I mean, it's a good discussion to have.
Expand on that for me.
Okay, well, if I'm understanding it right, our budget that we spend, which Aaron has gone over with finance, and we're going to have public hearing and talk about as a council, we have taxation limits there of what we can spend. And part of, just like if you had a house payment, your monthly house payment is factored in that budget. Not the whole house, but that monthly budget or annual amount. And if we borrow too much or borrow a higher amount, then our monthly payment, our annual payment is higher. Is that correct, Sean?
You're 100% correct. The only thing I would state, though, I think if I'm following the timeline here, the impact that you're describing would hit in 24.
Okay,
Because
good point.
I believe the timeline is the debt would be issued probably in the first or second quarter of 23, and the first payment would be till 24.
Okay, good point. So Aaron would not have to reassemble the whole budget
Right,
before
right.
Monday.
Right.
Okay, thank you. Because I was thinking it might throw off
Right.
what we're in deliberation for already. So, good point, thank you.
And that is one point of clarification, is the numbers that are in front of you tonight, they do not include the general operating budget levy increase that has been discussed at finance and will be discussed at council. So keep that in mind as well as, you know, you're talking about this. This is kind of, it's separate, but it's not, but it is, you know?
Right, right.
If you get that?
Yes, yes, I hear what you're saying.
Well, I think kind
There's a reason why I'm not in finance. You know.
Yeah, all of us. Go ahead, Mike.
kind of echoing where you're coming from. We all had the benefit of touring the buildings. Mike, you get to tour them a lot more than we do. But clearly that there's a need there. I mean, we've all identified that. And I don't know who Cedar Corp that did the initial overlook and the recommendations. You know, if there's a way for them to, I'll just use the term monetize the efficiencies we're going to pick up. I wish there was a way to display that on paper or whatever. The idea of you know, not the driving around, not the 7 trucks moving to get the one out. We all know what that means, but I think for the public to know that, you know, I don't know if there's a dollar savings we can put on paper, obviously, probably not, but just, that's where I'm coming from of this knowledge that
there was.
that just really can't.
I think they did, Malkin, and that's 2 years ago, but I thought maybe they came up with $50,000 a year or something.
Oh, they did, okay.
Would be saved in hourly time, because people driving back and forth across town, having a facility that was more central, you know, just efficiencies, but again, that's a few years ago.
Yeah,
when that
keep
was-
talking and I'll find it here.
I do a great job at talking.
There you go.
Probably
I-
employee retention too. The
Well,
pri-
employee retention, all those
Yes,
things
those things
add
are
up, and
important.
if we do want to get a calculator out, we could kind of make up numbers to do that. You mentioned the sale of the properties that are already existing that roll into this. And to me, again, we're all taxpayers, we're also looking out for the people that, put us in these positions. My goal isn't necessarily a smaller, yes, keep the taxes low, but my point is what those extra dollars mean to Dean and to Mike and their crews are, these efficiencies are gonna generate more time on their hands or more product or what have you, so we can get the projects done quicker than we used to, or not run out of time, or we never got around to it. To me, that's where I'm at, that I also don't think that we can say, hey, Mike, I think you need a new building for your crew, but I know that $9 million is too much. How about 6.5? I mean, none of us are qualified to chip away at like that. And to Dean too, we've seen what 1.3 million a year does. It patches some roads, and we're using 2x12 to hold up some of them right now as we speak. So an increase there to me means we wouldn't be doing our jobs if we said, let's keep it at 1.2 and let's see if Mike can stay in those buildings another 5 years. That's not why we're here. When we had a hailstorm, I gave it some thought of maybe I could go put a tarp over my roof. Well, that's not realistic. They have to be done professionally in the right way. So I support all the work that you guys did on this, and I think we can talk about adding to the street budget. Is that something you wanted to propose?
I am in total support of moving forward with the Public Works building, without a doubt. Thank you for the tour. I'm really sorry you've had to work in those conditions, and thank you for doing that. So we definitely owe you to get you a much better spot. And I feel bad that you've had to wait this long. I recently did a listening session where I had pretty good attendance from community members, and they were from all over the cities. And one of the things that they mentioned repeatedly were our roads. And it was a wide range of opinions, a wide range of people, but there was consensus that we can afford to do better by our roads. And that, so you're right, Mike, I do want to have conversation about bumping that. And I feel like that is an affordable amount for most folks. And that we'd be remiss if we didn't try to do better by that.
So I guess one thing that you could do tonight is approve the CIP as presented in front of you, with the condition that you direct staff to receive more numbers from Ellers showing that change in that $500,000 increase to the first couple of years, and then forward that on to finance for discussion, and they can kind of go back and forth and have that discussion from there.
Because they're planning to take that up next week.
Correct. This is going to finance on Monday.
And then full council probably at the 2nd November meeting. So we're moving forward quickly so that you can get us in the bond market, right? And get us out there. Okay, get those resolutions. So you're suggesting would you recommend that we approve these individually, Mike, or together?
Together, to make it easier on you.
Okay.
Yeah. Yep.
Okay. And then make a second motion to say that we'd like to request the numbers on another bump up?
An increase to the street in infrastructure for this, whatever amount you're talking, I think it's 500,000.
Additional 500,000
Should be able to
for
do
the
one
next 2
motion,
years?
For 23, 24.
I would think.
To 2.5, is that
To
what you were thinking, sir?
2.5.
And so that, in effect, will just about double what we're doing right now, which I know is not fixing everything, but
It's,
I know what you're saying and making a good faith effort.
it's a good step forward. It's bigger than a pinky step forward.
Well, Deb was saying we probably could do it as one motion, so,
Don't you think we can do it as one motion?
okay.
You can.
Well,
Do you want me to give it a whirl, and if I need correction, you guys can let me know? Okay.
I'll let you know.
Okay, thank you. I so move that we approve the 2023-2027 capital improvement plan as presented with the addition of increasing our road infrastructure to $2.5 million for the years 2023-2024.
I'll second it.
Okay, we have a motion and a second. Are you clear on that, Deb? You need to repeat it? Okay, all those in favor, indicate by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Okay, motion's carried. We've got a plan. Very good. Well, let's see, is there any items for old business? How about project update?
Well, I'll say that the sidewalk and curb project is complete for this year. The alley project is complete for this year, and the old fire station project is moving along. Today was supposed to be the completion date for the project across the street, and as you can see, there's no parking lot there at this moment, so we're trying to work with our contractor to put the pedal to the metal here in getting that finished, because we have some really good weather the next few days and some probably not so great weather following that, so you never know what November is going to hold. So it looks like we're supposed to get curb on Thursday. However, I'll believe it when I see it. And then after that follows the asphalt pavement for the parking lot, and then we're essentially significantly complete. So
as you mentioned, the weather's holding, the asphalt plants are still open.
Yes.
It's not rushing it doesn't need to settle, be compacted more, anything?
no, so
Good to go?
we do testing for density on the gravel to make sure that it is compacted enough so that there isn't that settling later and you got a wavy curb and dips in your parking lot and all that good stuff. So we do make sure that everything is up to spec before the next step gets put on there. So anyway, so yeah, we hope that the parking lot will be finished shortly, and we don't have any more projects yet to do this year. We are starting to work on lining up some stuff for next year. Obviously, we've been kind of on hold with what we were talking about tonight, not knowing exactly what the budget amounts were going to be and whatnot. But there's some stuff we're moving forward with, especially considering what streets to seal coat next year and that kind of thing. So we're working on that right now.
Great.
Any questions?
Quick question about
Yeah.
that. So is that all going to be the 4-hour parking zone, or are we giving any thought to,
As it stands right now, it's going to be all 4-hour free parking.
okay.
Yep.
Okay. Did you have any other updates, Mike?
Just one update from me. We hired Force America, who supplies our salt controllers in our trucks. We hired them to come out and calibrate our trucks. It's the first time that's been done in several years. So they started today going through our fleet, and basically what they do is they put a big scale underneath our spinner. We dump a bunch of salt in it, and then we just make sure that whatever's in the scale is matching what the computer is and having to adjust sensors. And it's something that the DNR actually really recommends for our MS4 program. And so the other thing too is now everything's kind of starting at zero, so we can pull reports at the end of the season or month or after a snowstorm and kind of just pinpoint how much salt was used during the snowstorm. So that'd also be awesome to have for filing purposes. So much needed thing to curtail salt usage and make sure that we're accurate.
Sounds good.
That's it.
Okay. Does anyone have any communications or item for future agenda? Okay, if not, well, it's a productive meeting, lots of details tonight. I'll entertain a motion for adjournment.
I so move.
Second?
Okay, been moved and seconded that we adjourn. All in favor, indicate by saying aye.
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 Opposed, same
Do you want
sign.
to go first? Nancy?
Thank you.
No,